Okay, next up we have Gerry Neustatl, and he's going to be talking about progressing accessibility at ABC.
All right, thank you very much for coming. My name's Gerry Neustatl. Thank you very much for the introduction, Russ. I'm the Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Lead at the ABC. ABC is also the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, or some people may know it as AUNTIE. So this session's called How to Sneak Accessibility into Enterprise Culture. Don't be worried, it's nowhere near as covert as the title sounds. I was at a session earlier this year and it was presented by somebody by the name of Cordelia McGee-Tubb. I really liked some of the stuff that she was talking about, and I've incorporated some of that into what we do at the ABC. One of the things that she talked about, which seems to be a common theme this year, is about baking in accessibility. So I'm just going to leave you with this question. We're going to come back to it at the end. When you're baking blueberry muffins, when do you want to add the blueberries? We'll leave it at that for now. So the ABC produces a stack of great content. We produce websites, we produce apps. Some of them include ABC for Kids, Kids iView, ABC Me. If you've got kids, you've probably seen these. We also, earlier this year, we released ABC Listen, which took over from ABC Radio. And that's available as an app for smartphones and devices. For people who are interested in news, you can digest your news either over the web, you can use the ABC app. There are a number of websites that we create, current affairs websites like Four Corners and Q&A. We have websites for Triple J. Triple J's Hottest 100 and that's actually going to be re-released very shortly. We release campaign sites like Right Wrongs is a campaign we released earlier in the year, which had a big accessibility focus as well. War on Waste is another. So there are a stack of websites that we create. Now, the ABC we're the public broadcaster. We want to make sure that everyone is able to read, listen, understand, digest our content. How do we go about doing that? Especially when we understand that a significant percentage of Australians have a disability. These stats, many people will be familiar with these stats in the room. So more than 4 million people, or 1 in 5 Australians, have some sort of disability according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And that's really just, as many people will know, that's the tip of the iceberg. 1 in 6 Australians have some form of hearing loss or are associated with somebody who does, and that's expected to increase to 1 in 4 by 2050. Vision Australia say that 357,000 Australians are blind or have low vision. Now that, as I understand it, that statistic is now a few years old, so it's probably increased since then with the population. And 10% of the population have dyslexia. So we're talking about quite a few people that have a recognised and established disability. If our websites, if our apps are not accessible, then we're simply not going to be reaching a significant percentage of Australians. So when I joined the ABC, I found that accessibility was really not being considered in very many projects. It's not that people didn't care about accessibility, they did. Everybody at the ABC does care about accessibility. We have people working at the ABC that have disabilities. If we were, for anybody who was in the room a couple of days ago, Naz Campanella was a keynote speaker. Now, Naz is blind. She is also a Triple J presenter. So accessibility is taken seriously at the ABC, but it's not considered in many of these projects. Why is that? There seems to be a real mismatch there. We work in a very agile environment, and we have budgets, and we have time constraints to get our projects across the line and out in the public view. So while developers and designers and project and product managers are saying, yeah, we really want to do accessibility, we don't have a lot of time. We've got constraints. We'd like to do it. We'll do it if we have time. And inevitably, they just don't have time. So accessibility is one of those things that was seen as nice to have. We'll get to it. And that just didn't happen. So when I first started at the ABC, I thought the best thing I can do is do what I've done previously and go through the websites, go through the apps, start writing down all the issues, giving recommendations for the developers. And I'm thinking, okay, great, I can wash my hands of this because I've given the teams everything that they need to know. They'll get on with the task. I can move on with what I need to do. Unfortunately, what I found is that it didn't really work that way. And a lot of the issues that I was writing up in our system called Jira, do many people know what Jira is? Yeah, okay, quite a few hands there. Jira is a documentation tool. It's designed to be a sharing tool within organisations. It's created by Atlassian, and it's a really, really good tool that I used for creating these issues recommendations. Developers would be able to jump in, find the issues, see the recommendations, fix them. The problem is that takes time. And in the agile process, in the agile environment, developers, designers, and stakeholders are working on projects. They work on them furiously to get them done on time, and then they're assigned onto other projects. So these issues that I was writing up were ending up in this black hole of cyberspace. Hundreds and hundreds of issues with fixes that many of them simply weren't being looked at because people didn't have time. As I said, it's not because the ABC doesn't care, and it would be very common for developers to come to me and say, look, we don't have a lot of time, we don't have a whole lot of resources. What are the critical issues that we really need to get done to get this over the line? And sure, we'd flag those and we'd get them done, but there were a lot that simply weren't being looked at. So I thought, there's got to be a better way of doing this. How can I get the importance of accessibility across to everybody at the ABC in a timely manner so that it's considered right through the project timeline rather than in some type of scramble at the end? So I came up with a few different ways of doing that, and I'm going to talk through this today. The first one is about selling the business benefits. Accessibility is great, but we do not want accessibility as seen as something that helps the relative few, because then it's likely to be deprioritised. I'm sure you've come across this yourself. Once, assuming that I can sell the business benefits, the next thing is to get everybody on board, and that includes everybody that is a stakeholder in the agile process, which includes product managers, designers, UX and visual designers, as well as developers and testers, and get everybody on board with the process. With everybody on board, the next thing that we have to do is make sure that everybody is working as a team, and that me, as the accessibility lead, is working very closely with all these teams to make sure that accessibility stays within the process through the workflow so that we can get the outcome that we want. And the fourth point, last but not least, is research. I'll talk about that a little bit later on too. Research is really important because we do not want to restrict or limit our thinking. We want to understand how people use our apps, websites and systems, because we can always find better ways of making systems more and more accessible and improving outcomes for everybody. So the first thing is, let's talk about the business benefits. There are a few of them, and they're I found them really, really handy in getting the point across. First one I want to talk about is SEO, or search engine optimization. Now, as I said a few slides ago, one of the things that the ABC really wants to do is get its information out to everybody so that everybody can use our product. Search engines are really, really helpful because that's their job on the web. What do search engines do? Search engines get the information and they serve it up to the people that need to know about it. Everybody is trying to do the best they can on the search engines to be on that first page of search results. Thing to think about for a moment, search engines are robots. Search engines have something that is very similar to people who are blind. Search engines can't see. So how do search engines understand what information to present in what order on search pages? How do they effectively index pages? They take the information that we provide and they use that. They will look at things like headings and page title and image alt text. And the things that we say, this is important. This is what you need to know so that you can understand what the page is all about and index it effectively. Interestingly, this is also, and not surprisingly, the information that we provide to screen readers so that people who are blind understand what the content is, are able to navigate through a page and understand its content effectively. So the bottom line is, if we make content accessible, it's likely to do better in the search engines. And I'll give you some examples of that, or an example. So there's this page on that's an ABC News page. The heading of the page is "Financial Stress, We're Worrying Ourselves Sick Over Money." What we did is we made sure that that was, of course, wrapped in a heading tag, that reflected the page title and had relevance to the content beneath it. So the heading, of course, had to be logical, make sense. By doing that, we help screen readers to provide the content to people who are blind, but we also help search engines understand the content so that they're in a better position to index it. So when we did a search for the keywords stress for money, you'd think that stress for money is a very common search phrase, and it is. You can see on there, it generates something like 171 million search results. And the ABC does very well. In fact, it's the first organic search result for that phrase. You know, there are various reasons for that, and I'm not saying that what we do for accessibility is the only factor that contributed to that, but it is certainly a considerable factor. So bottom line is, you get it right for accessibility, you're going to improve SEO. This is something that I've talked about with Pete Buffington, who's our SEO manager at the ABC, and in consequence, because we find that we actually teach very similar things and have similar goals, we've even constructed some of our training around that, where we both teach a course called Accessibility and SEO at the ABC. Another thing that I talk about a lot, and that's been mentioned a few times at this conference, is the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. The beauty about this is it says the third principle is solve for one, extend to many. And the idea is that if you get it right and you're helping somebody with a disability, you're going to be also helping a whole lot of other people, people with temporary impairments, people with situational impairments. An example of that would be somebody who has one arm. Now, they have a permanent disability. We will provide a solution that will that'll mean that web page, say, will be available to the person with one arm. So we want to make sure that, for example, the page is usable without a mouse. And by doing that, we're going to help people with temporary and situational impairments. Temporary impairment might be somebody with an arm injury. Now, I ran some training a couple of months ago for our news desk up in Brisbane. Somebody came in with their arm in a splint, and I'm like, oh, goodness, what's happened? She has RSI, she tells me. And because of that RSI, the doctor said, you're not to use that arm for a couple of months. I'm going to put it in a splint. To her, that means, well, I can't use a mouse. It was her right arm, she's right-handed. So for the period of time that she's got that arm in a splint, she has a disability that's equivalent to the person with one arm. And a situational example of that would be a parent holding a child that wants to get on with work. The Inclusion Toolkit has got 3 principles. The first one is about recognising exclusion. Now, RJ Mitty, you may recognise him from the TV show Breaking Bad. RJ Mitty has cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy certainly doesn't define him, and it certainly doesn't limit him. He's become a world-famous actor with what he's done. So by understanding what his needs are, we can design systems that will accommodate his needs that are going to help a lot of other people as well. The second point in the toolkit is about learning from diversity. And this is where research, comes into its own. What we really want to do is we want to look at our websites and our apps. We want to give them to people to use. We don't want to tell people how to use them. We want to learn from their experiences. How does somebody use our website? Somebody perhaps with one arm, somebody who is blind, somebody who has a hearing impairment, somebody with dyslexia. How do they go about using the site, using the app? Their experiences will educate us and help inform the ways that we can go about designing and creating interesting ways to provide for accessibility. Solve for one, extend for many. As I said a few slides ago, by doing this, by taking this process, we are creating systems that are just simply more usable for everyone. So these are a couple of examples of where I've looked at the business benefits for accessibility and how we can achieve the organisational goal of reaching more people by simply designing more better, more accessible, and therefore more usable systems. So now that we've provided information on the business benefits, the next thing is to look at building skills within the organisation. And in an agile environment, we have a range of defined roles, and they'll include designers, UX designers, visual designers, product managers at the start, developers, could be app developers, website developers, testers. How do we provide the information that everybody that has a role within the organisation, everything that they need in order to understand what they can do to bake accessibility in? Well, that's what we're going to look at now. So, designing for the average, the 80-20 rule. This is something we also talked about earlier in the conference. This was a traditional way of thinking for a long time, and it's kind of been turned on its head. Back in the 1950s, the US Air Force had a problem. Planes were going down. There were a lot of planes going down. I think in their worst day, they had something like, I think it was 19 planes that went down in a single day, and they had no idea why this was happening. They talked to the engineers. The engineers said the planes are fine. They talked to the pilots and the Pilots Association or whatever, and they said the pilots are fully skilled. They had no idea what to do. So they thought, okay, we're going to do a bit of research on this. We're going to measure the dimensions of 4,000, around about 4,000 pilots, and they measured the arm length, they measured the distance from eye to ear, they looked at a whole lot of parameters. And based on that, they designed a cockpit to suit the average pilot that fitted that 80-20 rule. And then they washed their hands of it and thought, this is fantastic, we've got what we want, everything will be fixed now. Problem is the planes still kept going down. There was a young lieutenant by the name of Gilbert Daniels who had another idea. He also measured another 4,063 pilots. He measured them for a range of 10 different dimensions. He looked at what the US Air Force had defined as its average and allowed a generous 30% buffer either way. What he found is that of those 4,063 pilots, not a single pilot met all of the 10 parameters that he was looking at. So the conclusion was that designing for the average doesn't work. His proposition, create a flexible system instead, a system that will work, that will be adaptable for everyone. The resultant cockpit had a seat that would go forwards and backwards and up and down. It allowed pilots to reach the controls so they didn't have to strain. It gave them better vision of their environment. And this solved the problem. All of a sudden, creating a flexible, adaptable system allowed all pilots with the skills to do the job that they needed to do. So the principle behind this is that designing for the average means barriers for many. It's as simple as that. Designing for the average doesn't work. We want to create flexible systems. So how do we go about doing that? There are another 7 principles that I quote a lot at the ABC. our designers in particular. So these 7 principles were put together in 1997 by Henry Mace, and he put this together with a team of architects, engineers, and who else? Environmental design researchers, product designers. It was intended for creation of the built environment, but it translates very effectively over to the digital environment. These 7 principles of universal design are intended to help create flexible, adaptable systems. Looking at a couple of those, the principle 4 talks about perceptible information. And as I said, I talk about all of these principles, but I'm just giving you a couple of examples here. So it talks about perceptible information. And traffic lights are a really good example of how a system can be very flexible by accommodating this principle, which says that the design communicates necessary information effectively to the user regardless of ambient conditions or the user's sensory abilities. The guidelines within the principle talk about using different modes, pictorial, verbal, tactile, for redundant presentation of essential information, providing adequate contrast between essential information, surroundings, and a series of other guidelines like that. So just looking back at those traffic lights, they're a really good example because, yes, they use colour, but they're not relying on colour. They're also relying on the position. So this is going to help drivers, perhaps drivers who are colourblind, drivers, well, I was about to say drivers with low vision, but each of the lights has also got a shield over it to stop ambient light coming in. So this is a really good example of a system that takes into account environmental concerns to make reading and understanding or perception of the information as broad as possible. With ABC Listen, we do a similar thing. So ABC Listen, the information is very, very clear. We provide information in a variety of ways. We've got buttons with clear iconography. We use text alongside in many cases. We provide alternative text for people who are blind, so the system is usable and perceivable by many different people in different ways. Another example is Principle 5, tolerance for error. So that reads, the design minimises hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. Now, that screams, in the digital environment, screams forms. We need to make sure that forms are understandable. If people do make errors, we want to make sure that they're notified about it, that they're provided with ways of correcting those errors, and if there are any in particular, if there are any issues such as payments or anything like that, so financial transactions, that people have ways of being able to check what they're doing before they make that transaction. And when we, oops, I think I've clicked something here. There we go. So when we redesigned the ABC shop and the shopping cart experience just recently, these are some of the things that we took very much into account to make sure that everybody has got a great experience when using the shop. Another thing I like to do at the ABC is run workshops for designers. In these workshops, we just talk about different ideas and come up with creative solutions for arbitrary experiences. So one that I used recently with a team of designers was the idea of a bar called Pitch Black. Now, Pitch Black Bar it's a hypothetical bar, but the idea is that patrons can go in there, they can enjoy a drink, they can have something to eat in total blackness. Now, the owners of the bar want to engage people, they want to provide a fun experience, so they want people to be able to experience videos. They want patrons to be able to choose videos, they want them to be able to play them, pause them, change videos. They want patrons to be able to do it in isolation so that they're not disturbing other patrons at the bar. My question to designers, what are we going to come up with? How can we go about achieving this? Some of the ideas that people had were to provide headphones for patrons so that people wouldn't disturb one another when they're listening to the videos. But because the bar is pitch black, we're not going to have screens either. So what are we going to need? We're going to need some type of description that talks about what's going on visually. We want to make sure that that visual information is not going to compete with the sound in the video. We want to make sure that the controls for choosing videos and changing videos and pausing videos are tactile, so that people in total darkness can understand what they're experiencing. Somebody actually suggested that they need to be waterproof controls as well. All right, so with developers, this is where we talk more WCAG and ARIA, and I get developers to use systems. So an example of that would be tabs. Now, on the ABC corporate site, we've got a history page. We talk about the history of the ABC. People can move through the page with tabs. I'll get developers to turn screen readers on and experience it for themselves. And with that understanding, it really helps them when it comes to coding. Then we'll look at the code. So here we've got ARIA markup. By understanding and recognising what needs to go into it, they can move forward with creating tabs. Testers are really important, and I can't stress this enough, because testers in the Agile process are testing components and slides and screens throughout the build process. In our case, very often sprints last for 2 weeks. And so having testers on board, getting them involved with that testing, getting them to use screen readers and understand WCAG and understand what it is that they're looking for really helps me by having other people other than me testing accessibility throughout the Agile build cycle. To help them do that, I provide them with a range of resources. We use Confluence, another Atlassian product, and I'll help them to write up issues as they come across them, and I give them a very simple checklist of common issues to look for. Very importantly, we all must work as a team. So as the accessibility lead, I embed myself in all digital projects. I help write user stories. I'll mention them in a second. I help our designers review, I review the designs and provide feedback to developers for the implementation of those designs. I work with the testers to review incremental builds before doing a final pass before we go live myself. User stories, really, really important, and I can't stress this enough. User stories will help you get the ideas early in the process. The way that these should be written is as a role. I want this goal so that this benefit is achieved. By doing it early, it's written up in the process for the creation of that tool, and it becomes something that's very testable by testers as well. So I can't stress this enough. Do that. We did it with Hottest 100 last year. Examples would be, as a user with limited mobility, I need all interactions to be keyboard accessible so I can reach and trigger them without a mouse. As a user with low vision, I need to be able to magnify content without blurriness so I can read it. And as a user who's blind, I need to find headings with my screen reader so I can read the content that I'm interested in. I mentioned this at the start, research. Don't limit yourself to WCAG. Get the product in front of people, get them to go over it. You'll always come up with new creative uses of product that you can incorporate into the builds. And get people together, talk about the findings, synthesize those findings, and have the outcomes added into the build for future rounds of testing. So the results of all of this, the ABC is now 100% accessible, and I can walk away. It's actually not quite like that. But we are very much on the way there. Hottest 100 is more accessible than it's ever been. Have a look at the 2017 one that'll come out later this year. ABC Listen app is a very, very accessible product as well. We do have a few issues. Research has identified a few issues for us. For example, we do know that people with low vision have identified that there are blotches of colour, which is something that we want to look at in the future. The ABC app is we're very excited about this. This app has been developed with accessibility baked in from the ground up. It's not 100% accessible, but I tell you, it's very much heading in the right direction, so absolutely give it a go. Accessibility is a journey. We're not there yet, but I tell you, we are absolutely headed in the right direction. I'm very excited about where the ABC is going with accessibility of its products. Getting back to the question that I had right at the start, when do we want to add blueberries? We can add them in at the end. We end up with a blueberry muffin, but it's not going to be as good as if we add the blueberries right at the start, build them into the process, much like we want to do with accessibility in the build process. My name's Gerry. I don't know how we're going for question time. By all means, get in contact with me. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody and continue the conversation afterwards. Thank you so much.